Right, good morning, everybody. Yes, you're still vibing with me right here on WRFG's Rough, Rugged, and Raw Strip on UniverSOUL. I am your queen, Lady AC. What you just heard, of course, what you're hearing under me is my bed music for the month of May, and that is Rum, featuring Amavi, and that is You Love 'Em, representing the UK, and that's my bed music for the month of May. Before that, just give you the music of everything you just heard, because of course I gave you good soul as always. That was Solange with Almeida, featuring Playboy Cardi. So I like that, love that joint. I ain't gonna lie, from her album, that was my favorite. Um, Before that, I threw it back a little bit, gave you some Diggable Planets, and that was their song called Dog It. Before that, I gave you new music, or the latest joint by Miss Georgia Ann Muldrow, and there's a song called Overload. Before that, I gave you new music, or the latest track from Major, featuring a rapper by the name of Cas, and that was his song Love Me Oi. Before that, I gave you Miss Coffee, and that was her song called Toast. And that's pretty much how I kicked it off early this morning for you. So hopefully y'all felt the vibe, felt the island, the Caribbean vibe right there. A nice little salsa, sensual kind of vibes. I loved it. And of course, it always black as hell. Anyway, hopefully you guys are enjoying me so far, enjoying the vibe, and I appreciate you for tuning in. Shout out to everybody tuning in to me on social media, Facebook Live. So today's topic has been called, or today's show has been called Trigger Warning, because we've been talking about triggers. With it being mental health awareness, one of the things about awareness is that we have to be aware of our triggers. What triggers the mental, well, honestly, can trigger our mental illness, but can trigger us, period. It can either cause it or even affect our mental health. So just to give you a little backtrack, or just catch it up for everybody who, is just tuning in, this is your first time listening. So, of course, you have to know what is a trigger. And so I use the Urban Dictionary definition, which basically states, and I'm paraphrasing, basically states either individual or either individual's instance, situation, or even image that causes a reaction due to a traumatic event. And so pretty much when it comes to triggers are things that we within ourselves have developed based off of certain situations, certain people, certain experiences have caused us along the way that ultimately affect us in so many different ways, and especially with mental health being as important as, emotional and its physical health. Triggers do have a tend to affect our mental and emotional health more. So of course, if you suffer or you're dealing with mental illness, it even affects it even more because it takes it to a much needed level. Because whether when it comes to mental illness, whether it's just simply a chemical imbalance, or some cases mental illnesses come due to trauma, or due to circumstances, or due to the mental work that we kind of repress and leave there. For instance, with me, I know for me, just being honest, with my depression developed because I repressed a lot of my feelings. And that's how it developed over time. So those are so many different ways it can come. But when you have experiences or images or circumstances that happen out of your control, that trauma can add to that pressure, can add to those mental health issues. So we have to be aware, and within this awareness, we have to be aware of our triggers. So last hour we kind of talked about how those triggers kind of come into effect in our relationships and our connections, or within our work with dealing with our mental health. And so what tends to happen is when we affect with triggers, and just the human response period, we tend to want to cope with it. When we're in that healing process of trying to overcome those triggers, instead of in the sense of healing, we try to cope with it, or we tend to try to create we seek help. We go to therapy, we go to these ways, but a lot of the times we try to reach out for help. And in some of those ways, which is nothing wrong with that, but sometimes when we reach out, we tend to make connections, or we tend to connect with people who experience that same trauma on some level. But what the danger in that is that we tend to pick people or connect with people and mistake that connection for compatibility or for likability or for a foundation to create some kind of relationship on, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a relationship, whether and try to create something romantic in that. And I talked about an article that I posted, basically is being aware of that danger of not mistaking your trauma, your connections of trauma, as compatibility. Because the danger in that is that if you are dealing with somebody, or you're going to a situation unhealed or hurting or suffering from that trauma, and you date someone who also was afflicted with that trauma, and you try to build something on that, that foundation is uneasy. Because instead of actively working to heal and kind of be a support system for each other, you basically are using each other to get over this healing without doing the work. You expect this person that comes into your life to heal you, and vice versa. But that's never the case, and you ultimately will either one or two things. You either make the situation even more, creating even more trauma, or you basically recreate, or you basically end up getting hurt or use yourself even more, because ultimately the trauma that's left unhealed just tends to show up, and it breaks you up anyway. But either of the situations, you're still hurting, you're still healing. And so what was interesting about the article is showing how in those connections or those relationships that we make, is that the reason the situation tends to fizzle or tends to break down the way they do is because literally the connections you make are the mind's response to help you get through that trauma. So you make these connections, you make these steps or these relationships and together y'all kind of overcome that trauma together. But once you go through that, and once you get over that trauma, or the trauma is removed or away, there's no need for that connection anymore. So it starts to break down. Now imagine if that is the only thing connecting you with this person, what else do you have left? So now you create this tension, now you create this miscommunication, now you create the actual feelings that you haven't dealt with now start to come to the forefront. And they now start to become as we call red flags, or they start to become unhealthy or hazardous, or all these different kind of things to the relationship or the connection or the friendship. And then ultimately it just fizzles. And it was not really worth it in the end. Another way that we start to see this in people who have survived traumatic situations. So for instance, people who have, in a sense, they kind of related to what is called as Stockholm syndrome, basically where people are in traumatic situations, but their mind kind of manipulates it to where they try to find the best or the comfort in the situation. So for instance, one with people who have been, the example the article kind of brings up is people who've been to war together, people who are soldiers or who are veterans, and who go into that very high stress environment where you literally are surviving. So you create these bonds and connections with your fellow soldiers or with the people you're out on the battlefield with. Not saying that, these don't last, or that, you can't connect with them, or you don't consider your brother or your sister or whichever way. But because you're in these situations, you have no choice but to connect. Because you're all trying to survive. You're all trying to come back home safe. You're all trying to get the accomplished done while still being intact. So by doing that, you create these very strong bonds, these very strong connections. But once the war's over and you come home, that connection fades away. But guess what's still there? That PTSD from that effect, that depression from that effect, the sadness, the sorrow from watching people you did connect with pass away in front of your eyes, on all these different things that we can only imagine that happens, they are still there. So now all these things come up, but that connection just fizzles. So now these veterans or now these soldiers are left with these feelings that they haven't dealt with, that they haven't healed with. And it definitely affects your mentality. Or even on a small, on another level, when we see police brutality constantly, and so much, and so, on constant level, almost every day there's a video. Or for instance, for me recently, when we see these issues of the heartbeat bill, which is everybody's talking about. So we're seeing how people are criminalizing women who have been, who want to control, have control of their bodies. The triggers from that could be, people who have had abortions before, for people who have miscarried before. Imagine now there are laws now being put in place to criminalize people who have. So imagine you going through that and now seeing somebody put so much pressure on you. That's triggering. That's very triggering. And that can sit there, or the example I brought up last hour, because like I said, I can't speak for nobody else. I can only speak for myself. That people may not think that going through a breakup is as traumatic, but it can be very traumatic, especially if you were being cheated on, being abused, of course, being taken advantage of, being lied to, being used. That is very traumatic, especially when you put your heart or you put your connection into it as you think you are. So now we go into these relationships or these friendships with that baggage still on us. And I would say even I made that mistake, because I went into it when I was in the dating scene or whatever. And like I said, I don't know, dating wise, I'm kind of on the fence, but that's a whole nother show. Just to be real. But when I was in the dating, or when I was going out and dating, that usually I would connect with people or partners that that have been hurt too. And so I was like, okay, well, you've been hurt, I've been hurt. So we know what that feels like. So we don't want to do that to each other. So, and that's how the foundation started. But of course, because I never healed myself, or the other person never healed themselves, we end up hurting each other anyway. Because we're expecting the other person to heal. We're expecting the other person to help us. We're expecting the other person, well, since you've been through it, you should know what it feels like. So you're not going to do it to me. It's the assumption. But the fact is, because we never actively healed, or I never actively healed myself, that I was more susceptible for it to happen, because I didn't work through those things. Not say I deserve to be cheated on, not saying I deserve to be hurt again and all these different things, but because I was putting so much on this relationship to heal it, instead of actually healing it myself and us creating a foundation to grow from it, it basically just recreated that very same trauma I was trying to avoid, or that they were trying to avoid. And it ends up creating an unhealthy relationship and a very destructive relationship that when it does end, because unfortunately in the case that it does end, it always ends. Especially when you create something on a very terrible foundation, on a very unstable foundation, it's not going to last as hard as you want. Or if it does last, it's very unhealthy, it's very toxic, and it's very time consuming. And there are very other many ways to deal with your time. But, that's why I said you have all these triggers, all these ways of expecting. And of course, recently, with all these beautiful Black trans women being killed, that's very triggering, especially to someone who is of that community, that you can't even live or be in your own skin without somebody threatening you. That all is triggering. It's very triggering. So how, and so in ways of coping with that, we tend to try to lean on others, but we have to understand that when we lean, we have to be willing as well to understand that the enemies are within us. That, like the African proverb says, if there's no enemy within you, the enemies outside can harm you or can affect you. And usually what happens with these triggers now, even with scientists of psychology and sociology, nobody really kind of knows what triggers are, or how they created, how they began. But what we do know is that when those triggers do happen, they are aware, and we have to understand methods of what causes them and how it affects us. And so, and we have to be aware of that. Sometimes those triggers are, they're there in a sense of our own way of mentally trying to protect ourselves, because when we experience those triggers, we tend to react in so many different ways. So people tend to lash out, tend to act sharply, and tend to act aggressively, tend to act very strongly. Because in those situations, maybe you couldn't control it, so you didn't know the correct response, you didn't know what to say or what to do. So now that you have this chance and you're experiencing that trigger, now you know how to fight or flight now. And honestly, that can have a lot of effect on your mental health, on your balance on trying to maintain it and trying to hold on to it. So you have to be aware, and keeping that awareness, be aware of those trigger warnings, be aware of those triggers that affect you. Now, just that's the catch up, everybody, of what's been said so far. Now, when it comes to triggers, how do we deal with them? How do we overcome them? Now, of course, the work is up to you, because only you know you. Only you know what's best for you, and you know how to work through them and how to heal yourself, or what would be better. But the thing is how to address them in a healthier way, instead of trying to use people, or instead of trying to combine or see it as compatibility ways. You can be aware of your triggers. First of all, be aware of what triggers you. Is it words? Is it images? Is it feelings? Be able to communicate that to yourself first. So maybe, because in some cases, like for instance, people who've been abused, maybe there were certain songs that were playing during the time of the abuse. Maybe not listen to that song. Maybe to kind of remove yourself from that. Maybe there were certain sounds that you heard. Maybe there were certain images that you heard. Maybe there were certain words that were said. Maybe there were certain smells that were given. Maybe there was something, like for instance, the people who have been abused, maybe someone coming up behind them is a very big trigger. So maybe when they connect with people, they don't like nobody coming from them from behind or surprising them. So be aware of that with yourself. In a way to kind of express those triggers, or to be aware of those triggers, be able to communicate them to people. Say, hey, look, the person who did this to me wore the color red. So for me, I don't like seeing the color red. I don't like dealing with this red. Communicate that. I'm just using that as an example, not saying that, it could be, but it could be that legit. Maybe the person liked to drink a certain beverage, so every time they were around you, or every time they caused harm, or wherever you had that harm or that trauma, you smell that image, or you smell that beverage. Tell the people who you're in contact with. Tell the people who you're invited with. Tell the people who you're dating. Tell them, hey, look, I don't like that smell. I don't like that beverage. Can you not have that around me at this time? Maybe you're in a social situation and you have to talk to people about certain issues now that you haven't dealt with. Like, for instance, there was a time where I guess thinking and talking about suicide made me uncomfortable. So when the conversation would come up, I would literally either excuse myself or have to explain, hey, look, I feel a kind of deeper connection with this that I don't feel comfortable addressing. And then I step back. Now, the problem is when you explain your triggers and people still tend to ignore them, still tend to kind of taunt you with them or take advantage of them. That's when you know you have to leave those people alone. That's when you know you have to cut them off. That's when you know you have to walk away. That's also being aware of your triggers. If there's nobody respecting your trigger warnings, nobody respecting that communication, walk away. So that's also a way to heal yourself, or to be aware of your triggers, is if anyone is intentionally harming you with them, if anyone is intentionally ignoring the fact that it bothers you, remove yourself from either that person or that situation or that instance from your life, because that's going to continue to mess up your mental health awareness, your mental health in period. Just trying to balance out and deal with it, that's going to mess that up. Another way to kind of deal with your triggers head on is, of course, to seek help. Definitely, if you have the money, if you have the resources, definitely talk to your therapist, adjust your medications, find and talk through them with different healthier ways for you to do so. If you're a person, one thing I'm very big on is, if you're talented or if you have a gift, use your gift to help you get through those traumas. If you're a writer, that's why you see a lot of people do poetry and write movies and write films and write music, or just write journals, period. If you're a writer, definitely write it out. If you have to, in order to let that escape and let you deal with that, put it down. If you are, if you like to cook, use your skill. Cook when you get stressed, instead of, not stress eating or anything. Use your skills to create something new, to create a different recipe. If you love to exercise, take that moment to take those long walks. Take those moments to do that extra rep. If you need to sleep and lay down, take that moment to meditate, lay down, breathe. Know that it's okay. Because you will be okay. You will. You will be good. You'll be okay. But just once again, in this mental health awareness month, definitely please, when you talk about awareness and you want to bring awareness to you, be aware of your triggers. Be aware of the things that unaccept you, but at the same time, when you do reach out for help, be mindful not to just connect with someone because y'all both experience triggers. Now, don't connect with someone just because, because y'all both have similar backgrounds or grew up a certain kind of way. While that is okay, but remember to connect with somebody who is trying to heal, or who wants to help you heal, or who wants to be that support system as you heal. Not just use you to get over it, and then when they do, they're done with you. No. Or vice versa. Don't do that to yourself. Because it's unfair to you and that person to put yourselves in those situations. It is. So in this mental health awareness month, take care of yourselves. Listen to your minds, listen to your bodies, and mind your trigger warnings, and use your own personal health connections or talents or feelings or emotions, and listen to them. Because they won't lead you wrong. Listen to that intuition they're telling you. And you'll be good. All right? All right, y'all. And I'll leave y'all with that. Because, of course, coming up next is Good Morning Blues right here, only here on WRFG Atlanta. That is it for UniverSOUL. I'll come to y'all next week. A good show, good soul as always. But of course, you'll be rocking with me, Queen Lady AC. I am on all social medias at Queen Lady AC. On one word, I do have a Facebook page where I will post these resources that we talked about, as well as the article that I talked about. Once again, that Facebook page is Queen Lady space AC. All right, y'all. Y'all have a good week, good weekends, and I'll see y'all then. And of course, I'll leave y'all with my closing song right here. This is, if I can find it, this is Donnie Cloud9, the DJ Spinner remix right here on here, y'all. See y'all next week. Yeah, there it is. Okay. I couldn't find my shoe. All right, y'all. Yeah, remember, in this mental health awareness, please take care of yourselves. Please be aware of those triggers, how to deal with them, how to cope with them. And then, just take care of yourself. That's part of the self-care. That's part of the good health. All right? Until then, y'all. See y'all next week.